This episode will be told in layers. The tasty summer treat I'm talking about today has 3 ingredients, and while they're all delicious on their own, together they are incredible. And this episode will be set up similarly, with different stories smushed together into one show. This episode also has a little mature subject matter in the first section that refers to the birds and the bees, just a heads up. I'm your host, Emily Prokop, and this is the story behind s'mores. But first, a quick message. I am so excited that the story behind book will be available October 15th, 2018, and it's already available for pre-order now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. This book is a collection of 50 histories of everyday objects, some from the show and some that are just exclusive to the book. For those who have listened to the show from the beginning, don't worry, even the chapters based on past episodes have some extras thrown in there. Visit thestorybehindbook.com to find out how you can pre-order, or search for it on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. If you have very young ones in the car, this would be the time to maybe skip ahead a few minutes until you hear the background music change. The first part of the s'more is the graham cracker, and for those wondering how there is any sort of mature content in this section, you might be surprised to learn that the graham cracker was invented as part of a diet to quell sexual urges. The inventor, Sylvester Graham, was a Presbyterian minister from Connecticut and considered a bit of a radical in the 1820s and 1830s when he began lecturing about how certain foods like meat and bread made with refined white flour were causing an increase in humans' animalistic desires. He thought that acting on these urges negatively affected the body and mind. He's considered by many to be one of the forefathers of vegetarianism, but also suggested the standard American diet consists of more fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, cutting down on things like meat, sweeteners, alcohol, and even spices. He invented a bland, dense wafer made with coarsely ground winter wheat, which he fed to his followers. This became known as the graham cracker, even though there weren't the usual ingredients of brown sugar, honey, or cinnamon as we know today. As you can imagine, many bakers and butchers were not fans of his, but he did gather a bit of a following. They were known as Grahamites. These Grahamites would write to him to tell them how their ailments were magically cured because of the new diet they were trying. And probably while the diet may have helped a bit, Graham also proposed a few other ideas that seemed radical at the time that probably contributed to the Grahamites' health improving, such as daily bathing, getting fresh air, drinking only water, and exercising every day. By 1900, graham crackers were made across the country, but Graham's original movement was dying down, and within a few decades, honey was added as a sweetener. By the time Nabisco began making them in 1931, they were made with sugar and honey, and the use of wheat flour to make them has decreased over the years. By the way, one of the people who admired the work of Sylvester Graham was John Harvey Kellogg, who developed Kellogg's Corn Flakes with the same idea to quell sexual urges in mind, believe it or not. Before the marshmallows we know today as the fluffy confection on grocery store shelves, the word marshmallow was actually the name of a flowering plant that grew close to marshes. These flowers are part of the mallow family of plants. They're not fluffy and they certainly aren't sweet, although the root and leaves were known for their medicinal properties in ancient Greece and Rome. The plant was used in healing balms and as a laxative. Egyptians mixed the sap from the flower with nuts and honey to create a sweet candy. There are still old wives' tales that say to cure a persistent cough, you can eat a marshmallow, even though the marshmallows we know today don't use the actual plant anymore. By the 19th century, the French combined the flower's dried roots with sugar, water, and beaten egg whites, which formed a foamy dessert. But when the treat became popular, gathering and drying and preparing the roots took too long for production, and gelatin was substituted for the plant. This made the treat more stable and able to be put into molds to form easy-to-eat shapes. A century later, in the 1950s, manufacturer Alex Daumack made the production of marshmallows even quicker when he developed a process that used air to push the ingredients through metal tubes, and the ropes that were formed were able to be cut in more uniform sizes. Kraft Foods used this process in their branding as the Jet Puft tagline. Even though marshmallows are a key ingredient in s'mores, believe it or not, the sale of marshmallows is at its highest in October and December. And one more thing relating to marshmallows. Many remember Stay Puft marshmallows as being a real thing, but the marshmallow creature in 1980's Ghostbusters was purely fiction, until 2010, when Omni Consumer Products, which makes products based on TV and movies, came out with Stay Puft brand marshmallows, which for some reason were caffeinated. Even though any chocolate bar can be used to make s'mores, most people associate Hershey bars with them. Hershey's flagship product was developed by Milton Hershey. He was born in 1857 and was fascinated with candy. Like many success stories, he had a few failures along the way. If anyone's looking for an inspiring story about perseverance, this is it. The candy store he opened when he was just 18 closed after 6 years. He then learned the art of caramel making and began experimenting with it, adding more milk than the recipe called for. But people loved it, and he started his own caramel company in Chicago. And it failed. He opened a second caramel company in New York City. Again, it failed. He then returned to his hometown in Pennsylvania and started his third, Lancaster Caramel Company, which finally succeeded. But after a few years, he was ready to move on to something new. At the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, he became fascinated with chocolate making. The chocolate in America at the time was not like it is today. The cocoa used was bitter, and after tasting the Swiss chocolate featured at the fair, Hershey knew that chocolate was the future of candy. He traveled to Switzerland to learn their secrets, and when he came back to America, he sold his caramel company for $1 million in 1900, which is the equivalent to almost $30 million now. The Hershey bar and subsequent Hershey Kiss took the country by storm. Inside every hand-wrapped bar was a postcard from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, showing pictures of an almost utopia-like community Hershey built around his factory, now named in his honor, which included homes, parks, and schools. Since he and his wife Catherine couldn't have children of their own, he donated much of his wealth to programs for children, including setting up a trust that still funds the Milton Hershey School and cultural and community programs. Putting the chocolate bar with the marshmallow and graham cracker doesn't have much of a history itself. Marshmallow roasting became a fad in the 1890s in resort towns, especially for teenagers who used these gatherings as a way to flirt by nibbling marshmallows from one another's sticks. Mallomars came about in 1913, which is almost a s'more. I've talked about Mallomars in the past and didn't realize they weren't internationally recognized, so I'll go into a little tangent about them. They're essentially cookies with a marshmallow top dipped entirely in chocolate, and they can only be sold during the colder months of the year because they're prone to melting easily. Moon pies appeared not long after, which are similar except instead of one cookie on the bottom, they're made with 2 cookies and a marshmallow in between and dipped in chocolate. When a guidebook for the Girl Scouts of America came out in 1927 called Tramping and Trailing with the Girl Scouts, a recipe was included by Loretta Scott Crew called Some Mores, because once you make one, you'll want some more. The name was eventually shortened to s'mores, as we all know them today. Information for this episode was sourced from ThoughtCo, the National Confectioners Association, Food and Wine, and more links which can be found in the show notes at thestorybehindpodcast.com. This week on Trivia Tuesday in the Story Behind discussion group on Facebook, John learned that snakes can growl. Matt posted that the McDonald's in Sedona, Arizona is the only McDonald's in the world to have turquoise arches. Also, the word McDonald's does not appear on the sign. The reason for the turquoise arches is because of a city ordinance that says signs cannot distract from the natural beauty around. Most other buildings around its location also have turquoise signs, so they just went with it. Matt also posted that Jack Nicholson took a pay cut to play the Joker in the 1989 Batman movie. Because of this, he makes a percentage off all future Batman sequels. If you'd like to talk about trivia you pick up during the week and have it read on the show, join the Story Behind discussion group on Facebook. This episode was brought to you by the Story Behind executive producers who support the show through the Patreon page at patreon.com/thestorybehind. So, a big thank you to newest executive producer Ryan P. Jackson, and fellow executive producers Barry G., Bandrew Scott, Jared Dunham, Linguist Sam, Epic Film Guy Nick, Ryle Davis Jr., Dave Jackson, Sunshine in Power Cuts, Everyone Has a Podcast, Adam Higgins, The Beardcaster, Aliquity from Travel Gluten Free, Jim Collison, North Omaha History Podcast, Dan Brennick, Two Peas on a Podcast, Jason Bryant, History Goes Bump, The One Word Go Show, and Stargate Pioneer. I'm working on more perks for executive producers over on Patreon, including full transcriptions of episodes even before they come out. And there will be more to come because the executive producers are amazing supporters of the show, and many have been there since the beginning. As always, thanks for listening.